Alrighty, so we are finally now down to the last two episodes of the Moving Forward series. This is the penultimate episode of the Moving Forward series before finally we get to talk about the defending MLS Cup champion, that is the LA Galaxy in the Moving Forward series. But today we're going to be talking about the New York Redbulls, the loser of MLS Cup 2024 in the Moving Forward series. And despite the fact that they lost MLS Cup this year, they have no rights in terms of reaching MLS Cup this year. I mean, this was a team that, getting into the playoffs, I even said that this team is a dead man walking. Like team after how they blew against the Columbus Crew in the final day of the season, that looked like it was a preview of an imminent That's So Metro moment happen. But not only the fact that they got their revenge against the Columbus Crew in the playoffs, and really that series, if it wasn't for Atlanta beating Inter Miami in terms of the greatest upset in MLS history, I would say that one is probably right up there in terms of, because again, Columbus, just like Miami, was heavily favored against their opposition, and yet somehow in some way the Red Bulls pull off that, and then they got revenge against NYCFC in terms of that 5-1 beatdown that they suffered a month ago by beating them on the road in front of their backyard 2-0 thing at Yankee Stadium, and then they even crushed Orlando City hopes in terms of making it to MLS Cup. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, as memorable as this run is, I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody will say that. Well, it seems like they might have got that so metro moment again in MLS Cup, and there definitely were some factor that you could easily say that, yeah, that's so metro in terms of how the Red Bulls weren't able to win MLS Cup against the Galaxy. So that being said, they finished the season with 11, 14, and 9. Yes, they had a lot of draws this season. This team, um, one of the things that is frustrating to watch is that the amount of draws that they had, most of them is mainly because they dropped points late in the game and not able to put chances away. But they still finished with 47 points. They scored 55 goals this season while allowing 50 goals, which is good for a goal differential of +5, but they dropped all the way down to 7 in the Eastern Conference. And again, part of the reason why I said that this team was a dead man walking is because in the beginning of the second half of the season, I mean, they were still right up there near the top part of the Eastern Conference, and then they just kind of had a bit of a collapse in the second half of the season. It feels like things were falling apart, and again, that's kind of the reason why that I thought this team had no chance in terms of even winning one playoff game, let alone making it all the way to MLS Cup with just almost no momentum in their way heading into the playoffs. But as I mentioned, they lost to the LA Galaxy in MLS Cup 2024. Now, looking at the last 5 seasons, so yeah, the last 5 seasons, I mean, I already did a series talking about the New York Red Bulls in terms of the legacy of failure that they have gone through, and really the last 5 seasons kind of is right up there in terms of the peak legacy of failure that the New York Red Bulls has had. 5 straight first round exit a couple of times by the same team as well. In 2023, they finished 8th with an 11-10 and 13 record, finished with 43 points, but they lose to FC Cincinnati in the first round. 2022, they finished 4th with 15, 8, and 11 record, finished with 53 points, but once again, they lose to FC Cincinnati in the first round, and this time was at home, too. They were the only home team to not win in the first round and lose to a team that were making their first ever playoff appearance as well. In 2021, they finished 7th with a 13, 9, and 12 record, finish with 48 points, but they lose to the Philadelphia Union in the first round. In 2020, they finished 6th with a 9, 5, and 9 record and finished with 32 points, but they lose to the eventual MLS Cup champion Columbus Crew in the first round. That was a game that was also notable because that was Garrett Stuver first ever game, and I think that's the first time in MLS history where we see a head coach make his debut for a club in the playoffs. Like that must be very strange, and talk about pressure cooker in terms of, yeah, no pressure in terms of your first game in charge of the team, and it has to be a playoff game against one of the heavy favorites, that is the Columbus Crew that year. Now, in 2019, they finished with a sixth position with a 14, 6, and 14 record, finished with 48 points, but yeah, once again, they lose to the Philadelphia Union in the first round. Now, looking at the top goal scorer for this team, you got Lewis Morgan with 13 goals, followed by Emil Forsberg with 10 goals. Elias Manuel, no longer on this team. He's now with RSL with 8 goals apiece. Dante Vanzier with 6 goals. And Cameron Harper also chipped up with 5 goals to round out the top 5 goal scoring top assist leader. Unsurprisingly, or surprisingly, actually, it's not unsurprisingly. Surprisingly, it's actually Dante Vanzeir. Like you would have never guessed that Vanzeir would be the top assist leader of this team. But hey, if he can't score goals, might as well just set things up, as the old saying goes. And he did plenty of that with 10 assists, followed by Lewis Morgan with 7 assists, Frankie Amaya with 3 assists, Wiki Carmona with 3 assists, and Dylan Neal rounds up the top five with 3 assists. Best win of the season. It's got to be the 2-0 win on the road against NYCFC. I mean, arguably, you could say maybe the Columbus game was pretty big, both the one on the road and the one at home. Well, I wouldn't say the road one, as impressive as it is. It was frustrating as hell. If you're a Red Bulls fan, consider they had so many chances to bury Columbus in that game, and yet they weren't able to do so, and probably are very lucky that they walked away with a 1-0 victory too. But yeah, it's got to be the 2-0 win against NYCFC on the road in the playoffs. I mean, it's one thing to beat your hated rival, but to beat them in the playoffs, especially in the first ever playoff meeting, that's going to be something that Red Bulls fan will definitely have the bragging rights. I mean, I've always said that for NYCFC, as much as they have the bragging rights in terms of winning the first MLS Cup in the New York area, Red Bulls fan will always have this bragging rights by saying, yeah, but we're still the only team to beat you in the playoffs in this Hudson River Derby series. The worst loss of the season. Now I could have easily gone with the 5-1 loss. I could have done the same thing I did with NYCFC, where I could just kind of flip it around in terms of the best win and the worst loss of the season. But instead, I'm actually going to go with the 2-1 Chicago loss that the Red Bulls suffer on the road. The reason why I picked that one as the worst loss of the season was because the Fire was absolutely horrendous. I mean, this was a team that was going through their usual September collapse, and the fact that I mean, I know the Red Bulls were not in good run of form up to that point, but the fact that they go to Chicago, and not to mention that was the game where they also gave up a goal to Tom Barlow. I mean, that says it all when it comes to not only losing to one of the worst team in the league that was pretty much um going the wrong direction, but you give up a goal to a guy that you sold off that think that he's no longer good for you, and that he's also a guy that hasn't really kind of performed at all for the Chicago Fire, and yet he scored against your former team. Like, that was probably the worst possible outcome if you're a Red Bulls fan to see. Like, the last player you want to concede was Tom Barlow, and yeah, that again, that just kind of feels like it's a very Red Bull thing to do. And on top of that, they lost that game as well. Now, in terms of average attendance, 19,479. Now, that obviously is boosted a little bit because of them kind of having a sold out crowd against Inter Miami. And I said it's kind of a sold out crowd, even though technically it isn't, because when you look at that game, it was a rainy day in Harrison, New Jersey, and that, yeah, there was a lot of empty seats in that stands, but still pretty good, even though they didn't even get a chance to see Messi in person because he was injured during that point. But yeah, attendance has always been a problem for the Red Bulls. They've always struggled to attract crowd. Though this season it's gone a little bit better compared to previous season. I remember in previous season it got so bad that even though when they tarped up the upper deck, there was still empty seats in the lower bowl as well. Which, yeah, that's kind of embarrassing if you have to tarp off your upper section and you still aren't able to fill up the lower bowl. That is. Now, when it comes to MVP of this team, I could have easily gone with Emil Forsberg. I kind of gone back and forth between him or Lewis Morgan. I'm gonna go with Lewis Morgan mainly because if Emil Forsberg actually stayed healthy for majority of the season, he would absolutely be the MVP of this team. He really at times was the difference maker for this team. But I simply had to go with Lewis Morgan because the production is definitely there, and it's unsurprising that the return of Lewis Morgan with this Red Bulls side, their attack has looked much better. I mean, and Lewis Morgan is kind of a player that he's kind of reminds me a little bit of Jordan Morris. Both of these guys kind of had dealt with similar situation, had to come back from multiple torn ACL in injuries, and that when you suffer one torn ACL injury, it's tough enough to come back, but to suffer multiple of it and still able to come back almost the same self, yeah, that just shows you how good both of those players are. And once again, Lewis Morgan, I know this year he didn't get a lot of contention in terms of comeback player of the year, which I'm kind of surprised because, again, with the amount of comeback that he has, the journey that he has to come back and still look decent, you got to give give you got to give a lot of claps in terms of what he has done and still are at the top of the level. Now, in terms of disappointment, it's got to be Carlos Cornell, and the reason why it has to be Carlos Cornell, as good as he was doing that playoff run. Yeah, this season for majority of the year he was pretty bad, and the goal can see kind of shows that. I mean, I know the Red Bulls defense this year isn't as good as we've seen in previous year. There were some goals that Cornell has conceded throughout the season that you just do not see him concede in previous year. Like in previous year, he actually was a decent goalkeeper, but this year he just had an off game, and then just to add the top of that, yeah, that mistake that he had in MLS Cup against the Galaxy. I think that was the first goal that the Galaxy scored. Yeah, that should not have happened, and that that was one that he clearly should have saved from Joseph Payne so shot, and that just kind of sums up of how much of a disappointing season it's been for him. And I've even heard there's talks the fact that they might even think about moving on from him because I think he does have an option in terms of the contract next year. I mean, I guess maybe the Red Bulls might give him that option, thinking that he can have a bounce back year, but that's a bit risky. Consider again he is also starting to get a little in the older side, and not to mention, you're really hoping that he can have a bounce back year because this season it's been pretty much an absolute disaster, minus the great playoff run that he has, and then kind of revert back to his old self in the most vital game of the season. Now, when it comes to young player to watch, this is probably the toughest one because the Red Bulls. We know that this team has a ton of great academy players, guys like John Token, Daniel Edelman, Peter Trout, Julian Hall, Duncorn, and all those guys. I mean, the list goes on and on when it comes to great Red Bulls players coming out of their academy and coming out of their second team. So I'm actually going to go with John Token because he is definitely out of all the talented player that they have and talented youngster they have, he's the most talented one, and he's probably most likely the one that is going to be sold off soon. I mean, he's on the fringe of making the national team as well. So it's going to be a matter of time before he does move to Europe. It could be as soon as this summer transfer window if they do decide to move on, which is not going to be easy because he is also a very vital piece for this Red Bull side, especially from set pieces as well. So what went right for this Red Bull side? So they didn't really go that so metro moment during the Cinderella MLS Cup run. I mean, again, it's hard to believe how for a team that throughout the years have suffered so many that so metro moment, and there were times where you could say that it was almost that so metro moment, especially in that game against Columbus where they blew it late in game number two. It looked like that's so Metro was gonna happen, and it didn't really quite happen. And yeah, again, just this Cinderella MLS Cup run. This is probably the best Cinderella MLS Cup run we have had since the Colorado Rapids made it in 2010 and also won MLS Cup as well. Because I think there has been no seed this low that have ever reached MLS Cup. This is I think the lowest seed to ever reach MLS Cup history, and that again, it was just so unexpected. Consider how much the second half of this season was just an absolute failure, and it looked like they were set up. It's another typical Red Bull season of them exiting in the first round in a that's so metro style. When healthy, Emil Frostberg is definitely the difference maker. So this Red Bull side, from when you look in the past, they have tried to sign a difference maker player, and unfortunately, so far in terms of some of the difference maker player that they have signed, it really hasn't worked out. So this or last offseason they brought in Emil Forsberg, and we knew he was going to be a good player. He was very good during his time with RB Leipzig. I think he definitely could still be at the top of his game and could be a top player with RB Leipzig right now and even in the Bundesliga as well. But he comes to MLS, and when he's healthy, he is a difference maker. He's a guy that will really propel this team. It's no wonder why the attack started to score the goals when Emil Frostberg is there. It's kind of weird to see how they're finishing was so much better when he's on the pitch and compared to when he's off the pitch. But yeah, he is an absolute difference maker and something that they have not had that kind of difference maker probably since Bradley Wright Phillips when he eventually retired. Well, he didn't retire, but he eventually moved on from the Red Bulls back in 2018. And then, of course, the young kids grew up to come through in big moments. So this is one of the big issue with the Red Bulls, where as great as they are developing young talented player, A lot of these kids, when it comes to those big moments, you know the old saying, the lights are a little bit too bright, and it just kind of is the case. I mean, a lot of these young kids kind of struggle in those big moments. This season was different. A lot of those young kids basically grew up and really come through with big moment. A great example of that is John Togan having a monster playoffs, and even Daniel Edelman scoring the winning PK goal against Columbus. I mean, that's another moment to show how a lot of these young kids had definitely grew up because again in previous season that just wasn't the case. They just could not come through in big moments, and that's understandable because when you have these inexperienced players that when you're in these big moments like that, it's hard for these inexperienced players to capture those moments and break through in those big moments and guide this Red Bulls team further into the playoffs. So what went wrong for this New York Red Bulls side? So yeah, we talk about the second half of the season. It almost led to an epic collapse. I mean, the only reason why I think the Red Bulls didn't really just completely crater and basically exit out of the playoffs is because we talk about how bad the Eastern Conference was in terms of the eighth and ninth spot. I mean, the eighth and ninth spot was an absolute gong show throughout the season. If it wasn't, oh, they would have been a card team. They would have absolutely slipped into that spot. And again, that second half of the season, just an epic collapse. There were times where they went on long winless run, times where they can't score a goal that to save their lives. And yeah, I mean, this is why a lot of people just didn't believe in this Red Bulls team because there's no way in the world with a team that has no momentum whatsoever heading into the playoffs can make this incredible run like they did. Again, the finishing was absolutely horrendous in the second half of the season. It was so frustrating to watch, even as a neutral, watching Red Bulls game of how much they screw it up when it comes to their finishing. I think they're probably right up there in terms of the team that is so outperformed their expectancy see goals that there's only one way to explain it. They just simply curse in front of goal at times. And then of course, lastly, we talk about the MLS Cup moment. The Cornell mistake and the defense decide not to show up until the 30th minute. It cost this team because when you look at that MLS Cup, people don't know the fact that it was more competitive than what people think it is. I mean, everybody will say that. Well, the Galaxy kind of cruised their way to a victory. Well, not really. I mean, the Red Bulls, as soon as they got that goal back. Around the 30th minute mark for the entire second half, I think they were just slightly a little bit better than the Galaxy. They had their moments two in that one. But as we said before, you just simply cannot get yourself down 2-0 so early in this game, let alone an MLS Cup that is. And you simply cannot go down 2-0. And the two goals that they conceded, absolutely inexcusable. Those two goals should have never happened in the biggest moment of this season. And yeah, again, that's you could say that that's kind of like a that's so metro moment that for majority of the year that the Red Bulls have been very good defensively, and even coming into MLS Cup, they were absolutely locked down throughout the playoffs when it comes to their defense, and to have those kind of moments just kind of just show you that yeah, it's that so metro for that to happen in the most vital game possible. Now, moving forward for this team heading into next season. Now, as much as I know people will say, well, it's been a great Cinderella run that the Red Bulls had, but the question is, can they do it again next season? Most likely no. And this is not to disrespect the New York Red Bulls, but it is very hard to trying to make a Cinderella run again for the second year in a row. Especially, I've mentioned it for all these teams that made it deep to the playoffs so far. Of how I've already mentioned how much of a missed opportunity for some of these teams is because with how chaotic the East was this season, if it wasn't for some of the favorites just simply decided to not win in the first round of the playoffs, the Red Bulls probably would have lost in the second or even in the conference final as well. This kind of freaking incident and some good fortune that the Red Bulls received, that's not going to come heading into next season. And when you look at the talent wise that they have, yes, I mentioned Emil Forsberg is a difference maker, and also this kind of perfectly transitioned my second point of getting another big difference maker in Eric Maxime through promoting, though that's debatable considering he is getting being up there in age, and you don't know whether or not if he can still bang the goals like he did during his time with Bayern. Um, I still think when it comes to talent wise, this team is nowhere near in terms of the level of those two Ohio team, Inter Miami, or even their main rival NYCFC. And I know Red Bulls fan will hate me for saying that, but I do think right now, when you look at the roster, I still think NYCFC is stronger than the Red Bulls. And I know they'll point out, well, we beat NYCFC in the playoffs. Well, that's mainly because NYCFC didn't show up in that game until late in that one, and the Red Bulls, in some way, that 2-0 win that they had, don't let that distract you from the fact that they were under a lot of pressure in that second half of the game. And if NYCFC was a little bit more clinical, and if we see a That's So Metro moment happen, they probably would have blown that 2-0 lead. So again, when it comes to town wise, they definitely need to keep adding, and they better hope that some of these talent that they have that really kind of overperform doing the Cinderella run happen again, because more times or not, we've seen previous season when teams go on a Cinderella run, the very next season not only they suffer a bit of a regression, but it feels like it's back to the mean in terms of the New York Red Bulls probably going to lose in the first round once again. I mean, we saw it in 2008 too when they made that incredible run in MLS Cup, only to fall short to the favorite Columbus Crew. And how did that work out in 2009? Yeah, it didn't work out so well for this Red Bulls team. And then lastly, when it comes to the young talent, who's going to be the next one to do so? And I already said I think it's probably going to be John Togan. He's probably not got a lot of season left with this Red Bulls before he is going to be sell for a big amount of money, and the Red Bulls have no choice. They have to sell him, as big of an impact he is. He's a guy that is definitely going to make a big move to Europe, and he's a guy that I've even mentioned. He's on the fringe of potentially to have national team quality, as what we've seen throughout his growth, from both the Red Bulls Academy to now being just one of the most dynamic youngster in this league right now. But there you have it. That is pretty much it when it comes to talk about the New York Red Bulls in the Moving Forward series episode. As always, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this episode? And if you're a Red Bulls fan, what do you think is the MVP, disappointment, young player to watch? What went right? What went wrong? And most importantly, moving forward, how is this team going to look heading into next season? Again, tomorrow, I'm actually going to finish up the Moving Forward series talking about the LA Galaxy, the defending MLS Cup champion. And as we are going to talk about the defending MLS Cup champion, it is going to be a little bit different when it comes to the format of how I do the Moving Forward series about them. But stay tuned for that. That will be tomorrow, and that will be right after when I do the News of the Week episode, as I always do on Wednesday and Saturday, that is. But yeah, until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys do like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.